River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On October the 25th, I asked the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development about the broadband funding and the challenges of high-speed internet in a rural riding, such as the one I represent, North Island Powell River. Today, I'm glad to have the opportunity to follow up on this issue. As you know, Mr. Speaker, high-speed connection remains very expensive, and the speed and access is inconsistent across my riding, North Island Powell River. This unfortunate reality is common outside large urban centres. Whether it is the backbone or the last mile missing, it is a strain on our economy and restricts many opportunities. I'm pleased to hear the Minister has rolled out a new federal funding opportunity called Connect to Innovate. With $500 million over 5 years starting in 2016-17, I'm hopeful that this will truly extend and enhance broadband service in rural and remote communities. I have invited all the prospective applicants from my riding to take advantage of this source of funding and was pleased to see the deadline was extended. This funding was supposed to invest only in backbone infrastructure. The problem is that many rural and remote residences cannot connect due to the last mile issues. I was glad to hear the Minister heard our concerns and decided to include funding opportunities for the last mile as well. Backbone infrastructure in this new funding program. I also want to applaud the regional districts in my riding who have taken up a leadership role on this file by studying the gaps and making a strong case for improved telecommunication in our region. I recently had the pleasure to meet with local telecom providers in my riding. They painted a very grim portrait of broadband in rural and remote regions and are hoping to feel some meaningful support by this government. For decades, it has been the local providers who've managed to be innovative in providing the services to a very difficult marketplace. And this wasn't done without risk. They are committed to providing a service to the communities. They provide good jobs, and they are important jobs to ridings like ours. I rallied the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development to recognize that the betterment of broadband can't solely be done by one-time funding. Smaller operators need wholesale resources to help fund services on the edge. They need spectrum and access to land for relay sites at affordable rates, and meaningful, unobstructed access to wholesale resources. In short, they need the support of government at all levels and those of Industry Canada and the CRTC. Will the Minister listen and commit to helping them? Recently, I sent a mail out to the members of North Island Powell River on broadband, and I was pleased to see the level of feedback. I want to thank my constituents for sharing all of those stories. People in my riding are dismayed by the price gouge, and I've also heard from local businesses that could expand, bringing needed jobs into our riding, but they require better high-speed connections to do so. Others attested that the most remote and rural communities and First Nation communities are severely impacted by marginal access in the internet, especially for the important online learning that they need. Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents are concerned that this new federal funding will end up in the large telecoms pockets exclusively. They want to see real solutions on the ground to their homes, to their businesses. A collaborative effort from all stakeholders to create more accessible broadband. How will the Minister ensure that this happens?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to respond to the statement made by the Honourable Member on the importance of broadband service for rural areas in Canada. Mr. Speaker, broadband networks are the foundation upon which Canadians are building a competitive digital economy. This broadband infrastructure gives us access to global markets and job opportunities. This same infrastructure opens up new paths to education and training, delivers Canadian culture across the country and around the world, and connects us to our friends and family. We fully agree with the Honourable Member for North Island Powell River on the importance of broadband. It is vital to Canada's digital future, and it is vital that rural and remote communities be included in that future. During our consultations in support of the Inclusive Innovation Agenda, Canadians emphasized the importance of improving high-speed broadband coverage. We have some new figures released in October of this year showing continued improvement in Canada's broadband networks. 96% of Canadians now have access to internet speeds of 5 megabits per second or faster. 75% of Canadian households have access to internet speeds of 100 megabits per second or faster. We also see the private sector announcing their gigabit network investments that will truly transform our digital landscape. These statistics are encouraging, but they also highlight the digital gap facing rural Canadians. It is unfortunate but true that the economics of serving rural and remote communities are far more challenging than for urban areas. Adding to the importance of this challenge is the high level of need in these communities. For some of our most rural and remote communities that lack medical facilities, educational institutions, and robust job markets, the possibilities for digital solutions are limitless. This is why we see a role for our government, working with partners in the private sector and with other levels of government to improve connectivity. The Connecting Canadians program is one initiative that will help close the digital divide. Projects were announced in 2015 and 2016 will benefit 300,000 households in rural and remote parts of Canada. In December, our government was pleased to launch Connect to Innovate, a new program that will provide up to $500 million to build high-quality broadband networks in underserved areas. Mr. Speaker, working with partners across Canada, we are investing to bring transformative change to rural and remote communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just recently, the CRTC decided to deem access to the Internet as an essential service. This is a major step in the Canadian telecommunication history. I suspect this will have some profound consequences on our infrastructure and services over the next decade. This makes sense. As Internet usage is growing across our country and its practical applications are increasingly varied. Mr. Speaker, the job market and services are more and more web-dependent. Like many resource-based economies trying to expand and diversify, our riding's local economy needs broadband access to adapt. The CRTC decision to make the Internet an essential service is a step in the right direction, but we need a target and a plan. My constituents need to know how will this specifically impact rural regions and the many smaller providers in those regions. When can we expect details on how this new ruling will be shared?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci encore une fois, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. We all have a role to play in building Canada's digital future and ensuring that rural communities are included in that future. We are aware, Mr. Speaker, of the decision made where high-speed services were declared to be essential services. The private sector, provincial and territorial governments, as well as federal departments, can and are making serious efforts in this file. Recently, there was a federal and provincial contribution of $180 million to high-speed internet in southwestern Ontario. This project was spearheaded by the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus and supported by our government, as well as that of Ontario. This is an example of what we can achieve when we work together.
Limoilou.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Mr.